Did you know when it comes to a workplace culture, it either happens by default, design, or disaster for the most part? If not, you'll want to tune to this episode and understand how you can leverage data to design a culture that helps you attract, retain, and potentially promote top talent so that your business can thrive. Let's dive in. Welcome back to another episode of The Leader Within. Today, I'm excited to introduce Steve Keck, a cultural data expert and president of Span the Chasm, a talent, culture, and coaching consulting company. Steve helps growing companies design their culture using empirical data from the people within and maps the cultural undercurrents that can drive the ship. I'm excited to have him share his insights with you. Well, welcome, Steve. Can you share with us a story as to how it has shaped the trajectory of your career?
Thanks for having me. And yes, few things have affected my life the way the cultural data has. I knew at 12 years old I was going to be a financial guy. Got a finance degree, went to college, graduated, got into finance in my career, and did 18 years in banking. And then when I finally left, I started working with a fintech company, and I had to figure out a way to prevent hiring the wrong people. And so I found a psychometric assessment, and in it, it mapped my culture. Once I saw it, I realized I had gone 18 years into the wrong industry. I was the top 10% of most creative individuals, so I did not like to follow old rules. I liked to make new rules. And I realized I was in a 300-year-old industry, and I was generally not a culture fit for the career that I'd chosen. And I just was fundamentally shifted the way I viewed how I help and how I work with people and understand how to get people motivated based on the things that really come out of their core person. And being able to identify it through data has been so valuable for me to be able to assist companies and individuals as they're trying to make changes in their lives or find direction.
Okay, I am going to put a pause on that data piece and dive a little bit deeper on the leadership side, right? Because you've helped transform teams both by being a leader and actually partnering with leaders in general. So what would you say is like one of the biggest leadership epiphanies that you've had to date in leading and developing those high performing teams?
I'd say the biggest thing and it's sort of a core process that I go through, was that beliefs define behaviors which lead to outcomes. And if somebody has an incorrect belief about themselves, a product, the company, they're going to execute on behaviors that lead to the outcome that reinforces that belief. And if they won't change that belief, or if it's incorrect, they're going to get substandard outcomes. So when I lead people and work with teams, I always try to find and work back towards what those core beliefs that the individuals in those teams are working from. And by doing that, I can start to help them understand that, generally you've got to get everybody on the same page. This is why a vision keeps the whole team from perishing. But it also, if they have a false belief, it takes about 90 days for someone to change that belief. So if they're not ready to accept the change and they don't want to change that belief, that's one problem. But if they do want to, it's still going to take about 90 days for them to figure out how to reinforce that belief, that new belief, until it becomes solid. And then the behaviors tend to reinforce that, and you start to get the outcomes that you're looking for.
It's interesting that you commented on the 90-day piece because I didn't realize it takes that amount of time. So from a starting point perspective, right? If you're to walk into a team, you're like, everyone seems like really fixed with where they're at right now. What would you say is one key thing that has helped you start shifting or creating awareness around how that belief is actually not serving the greater team and the execution of the vision in itself?
What I tend to focus on is, what's the point of you doing this? Like, I chose this role. I was in banking. Why do I care about banking? Like, why do we care? And start to get everyone to the same agreement around what it's for. Helping people with their daily lives by affecting and giving them advice towards managing and effectively using cash and credit. That's literally what it is. But this is where, marriages fall apart, businesses thrive and disappear. There's all of these things happen along this day-to-day thing. And so when I can get everyone to start to believe one core single belief around this is what we're doing, then it helps to understand as you start to peel back towards their behaviors, are you behaving in line with that belief? And does that behavior go back to the thing that you've agreed to? And once you can get them there, it starts to open up where the beliefs are differing. Well, I really don't think I do that. Or I don't think that's, I'm just here for a job. And you're like, well, you're actually affecting people's lives, whether it's a job or a passion. So why don't we work towards finding a way to be passionate within the job so that you have a better effect on people's lives. And it turns out you'll probably end up selling better. You'll probably make more results. You'll probably enjoy your job better. And you'll find that, oh, I didn't know I could have a passion here in this particular career. And it all works back towards those behaviors. And the behaviors then start to align to the outcomes and create this cohesion from the new belief. But they have to see it in action, like, okay, well, you agree to this outcome, that we're doing this thing. Let's try this behavior that aligns with the belief I'm trying to get you to. And they get to see it, live it, experience it, and they reinforce that, oh, I can believe that about myself, or I can believe about this behavior. And all of a sudden it becomes integrated. And then it becomes something they turn around and teach the next person. No, we do this because we believe this. So do it this way and you'll get this outcome.
Appreciate that. And I think it ties into your work from a cultural due diligence methodology perspective. But for those who actually don't know what the heck that actually means, can you talk a little bit about your methodology and why you chose it?
Sure. Because I work on this belief behavior outcome mindset, the thing I discovered is that there are core cultural tolerances that you can actually map. When you take a personality assessment, it actually shows how comfortable you are with something such as conflict. And everyone deals with conflict, but they can deal with it on a spectrum. They could be charge in and let's fight this out, or they can be let's try to avoid it at all costs. But most people tend to fall somewhere in the middle. But being able to actually see that with a person saying, this is your cultural tolerance, what that happens to reflect is you find people that respond the same way. You work well with people who respond the same way. So when there's a conflict, two forceful people like to get in there and get it over with, versus two people on the opposite end are never quite figure out how to find a way to solve a problem together. And it creates a dynamic. So what my methodology does is literally maps individuals or companies, because they tend to attract the same tolerances, regardless of, age, gender, ethnicity, anything. It's really, do I like to handle conflict this way? This is how we do things here. And by being able to map this is how we do things here, you can actually see what is an undercurrent in a company and how well that's going to work with a new individual that you're hiring, a new company that you're going to purchase and merge with. Generally, just how do you communicate to the world what you bring to the table? This is who we are, and this is how our core values are reflected in our actions day to day, in the behaviors that you're going to experience when you come to work with us.
Okay, let's dive into that values to behavior piece. I think that's actually one of the most difficult exercises for a lot of leaders and companies to do, right? Because there might be a way of how I perceive a value to be, and then how the rest of the company perceives that value to be. So for you, as a leader, how have you been able to kind of level set so that everyone understands what it is that you ultimately want to translate that value into behavior to be?
When I work with companies around their values, it's such an intangible thing, and it can be something that often is dictated from the leadership. And we're a high trust company. And I'll give you an example. I went to a company, and literally the chief operating officer first day said, we want to be known as a highly trusted company. Well, when I mapped the individuals, every single executive was self-sufficient. They all like to do things on their own. They don't even trust each other. And I'm like, okay, that's not how you do things here. Is high trust is not how you do things here, because you don't like to collaborate. You like to solve a problem, come back in a group and tell what you did. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just not something you would highlight as a core value of trust, right? Now, they can have dependable product and they can be depended on to solve the problem. So dependable might be a better core value as opposed to trust. Does that make sense? And so it could, because it rings disingenuously, even in all the way down to the code, because there's a law called Conway's Law, which is your culture is embedded in your code. And so this team built products or code that was designed for you not to come back to deal with it. So it's not very collaborative code. It's here it is, it works, see you later. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. That's just the way they sell it. So I help them not lean into some dictated core value that they actually weren't going to uphold because it wasn't natural for them to do it that way, and focus more on what they could express both to the employees and to the customers. And when you have a core value problem when one of your employees walks by, looks at the core values on the wall and just laughs and goes, yeah, that's not true. And you're like, okay, well, if that's not true, if it's clear and present to an employee, you aren't living up to those core values, and the behaviors that are expected of the company aren't reinforcing those. And you just may have chosen them wrong, or you hired a bunch of people that changed the culture because there's now a bunch of people in creating this undercurrent of tolerances, and that's shifted, and you just need to adapt to it. And I've worked with companies where that's also happened, where we had a core value that was pretty good, but stopped being as good as some other core value, and we were able to identify it with a new group of people and create a new set of core values that more aligned to what could be expected both for the employees, the leadership, and the clients.
It's crazy how a word can actually have such a significant impact. Like when you talk about that disingenuous piece and how one was better fitting than another, I'm like, I can totally appreciate that, right? And when it comes to the data side of what you do and how you choose to map out everything to ultimately show a company, hey, like, you know what, this is how, when you map it out and you design so that you can actually have the culture that you want, can help you attract top talent. What would you say is like one of the biggest challenges that companies have in adopting a design your culture piece, right? Especially if they've been around for a few years.
So a lot of the work that I do isn't built to put your culture into mold it into something. It's designed to just reveal it. And so when you put a bunch of cultural tolerances together and you map them all together, all of a sudden you're like, wow, it turns out the leader of the company, which was one example, the leader of the company is way over here, but most of the company is over here. And so that difference is like, well, you've got 9 of your 10 employees are in this area. This is what your culture is actually expressing, right? And so this gives you a chance to start to go, okay, let us honor that, because every time you try to move all 9 people towards what the CEO expects, the behavior they expect and the tolerance they expect, you stress out the entire team. And so what's happening is all of your team is running under this mental, their brain is actually overworking because it's too busy trying to deal with the stress of having to work outside of their comfort zone all the time. Because it's normal for one leader to say, oh, we'll just do this. Like a good example would be preference for change. So someone likes change, loves to do all this stuff, and every Monday he comes in with a new idea. Well, everybody else doesn't want to change that fast. They wanted to put some things in action. They wanted to see it happen. They wanted to work through it. Well, every Monday they have to start over, and it's exhausting. And so over time, it's just they're constantly having to exert metabolic energy to try to stay on task with the job that is constantly keeping them out of their comfort zone. And so by being able to reveal it, you can say, okay, this is what literally metabolic rest and stasis looks like. And you know this, like when you're in good space with the kind of people that, like your people, right? You're like, oh, that's my man. That's my, we think the same way. We act the same way. We work really well together. You have low metabolic stress. You don't think about if I gave Steve this project, he's going to take it in the direction and probably close to where I wanted to go in the first place. And then you just kind of have like minor guidance, as opposed to now I've got to stop and I've got to teach Steve how I want it done every single time, which is exhausting to you and frustrating for me. So it's like, I just want to do the thing I think is right. And you're like, no, this is right. And then like, we don't ever see eye to eye. And eventually there's something wrong with Steve and I have to be let go.
So how do you use this for creating an inclusive and diverse culture? Because sometimes I think people mistake hiring that cultural fit for everyone has to think like me, potentially look like me, from that perspective, versus like, hey, here's a data to show you how there are complementary things that your company can leverage.
So I'm a big fan of diversity. I actually worked for the Royal Bank of Canada, and they had diversity as a core value, and I lived it. I had 7 countries represented in every office I worked in. Twice I had this. I was like, how did I get 7? It was amazing. But watching how the cultural dynamics, which is different than your cultural tolerances. The cultural tolerances are universal. Everybody has to deal with conflict in a certain way, and they all have preferences. Everybody has to deal with change. Everybody likes to take a certain amount of risk or lack of thereof. And so those are not related to a person's gender, a person's ethnicity, or cultural background. They may think, oh, because I'm this or I'm from here, there may be more like that. And there's a stereotyping thing. Data is data. It's like, this person is going to respond with a 95% cohesion to the way you will want to execute your work. They're perfect for you. And as opposed to this one's 45%. And they're like, yeah, but he's in my frat. And you're like, well, that's not helpful. That doesn't matter. Oh, he's a good buddy. I had people like tell me that, like, want to hire a guy because he's his bartender. I'm like, he's not a good B2B salesman. Just because he's good with people doesn't make him good with, he's like my guy. I'm like, no, that's not how it works. It doesn't make it good. It just means it can be you're going to end up firing your friend is what's going to happen. So I think the idea, and there's been a huge, backlash towards this diversity process. And I think it's short-sighted, and I think it's going to cause a lot of problems in the future. But what I do believe is you can use data to subvert a lot of that, because there doesn't have to be a name or a gender assigned to a list of tolerances. And if I match that list of tolerances before anybody finds out where they are, they even have an interview. And this is how we use I used assessments before, is you didn't even get an interview if you didn't score a certain tolerance at like the other role. So I mapped the top characters of that role, and like, this is the cohesion. They got to have 4 out of 5 of these characteristics. So they're just going to hate the job. I don't care where they're from. I don't care, how old. I don't care how much experience. They're just not going to like it. And so you can really leverage the opportunity for people to start to begin to unwind their predisposed expectations, and also get outside of their core network of people, because that's the first place most people look, is who do I know that can solve this problem, right? Who do I know who has someone who can point me to this? It's like, oh, my buddy or my friend over here is great at this, and then bam, you just got a job and no one even knew it was on, never hit LinkedIn. So I think there's an element there where there's a real value to be able to level that playing field. And what also happens, one of the things I love helping people in job transition. And when I do this cultural dynamic work with them, it helps build the language that they can communicate. So when they start to refer to the language that of their tolerances, they're able to reinforce quickly what they bring to the table. as opposed to my experience, which was on my resume, which everyone can read, or some algorithm can read. It resonates with the kind of job description that says we're a collaborative culture that does this, this, and this. And it's like, I'm a collaborative individual that does this, this, and this. And they're like, I need to hire that person, or at least need to have that person in for an interview, and let me be surprised. And that usually is where a lot of that real change starts to happen, because they have to, just like a belief, if it's a belief that they have to hire someone like them, well, that's not going to change overnight. They have to behave first. Then they have to experience the positivity of it. And then it becomes a dynamic belief of, oh, diversity is really good for me, for my company. And I can invest in it, and I can lead with it. And it can be because it gives me the outcome that I actually need, which is a broad client base, that reaches a lot of people, so I can serve a lot of people. If you don't have anyone in your organization that can serve a culture, it's just like, why? You're not going to sell that deep into a culture. And it's just, so it's like, if you can't figure out a way to hire, train, and grow leadership with all of these cultures, you end up leaving an entire opportunity on the sidelines. And so you don't know what your outcome you're missing, and you're only reinforcing your beliefs, and you've done nothing to grow. And I just feel like that's no way to live.
I can appreciate your approach with data in terms of, it's like, you don't even need to have a name, a gender, or whatever it may be associated with some of the indicators that you are assessing and looking at, right? And I think that approach to creating diversity and that fit, or that culture add, whatever you want to call it, within a team, is that it doesn't leave people feeling like, oh, I was only selected because there was a checkbox that you had to fulfill, right? From like whether because you are a visible minority or whatever it may be, or you're like, okay, I declare that I was LGBTQ, like as an example, like all those different factors. And then it almost pushes people away from even completing those surveys, because it's like, well, what if that becomes disadvantageous to me and it actually impacts me because of a bias, versus the approach you take? It kind of removes a lot of those opportunities for biases that can ultimately affect hiring and attracting top talent, right?
Yeah.
And what would you say is like a foundation that a company would need to be able to start doing this work? Like, are there certain parameters that you look for that say, hey, like maybe get this going and then you'll be ready for this work? Or is there not really parameters that you have to play within?
I mean, there has to be some expectation of the need. I think there's often, I would say this, if you've built a homogenous company by accident, because you just hired the people closest to you, and, so if you've done that and you realize that this is not getting you where you want to go, this is not serving the people, as many people as you can serve, you have to recognize that need, and it creates an openness to a new belief. The problem after that is who can help them see a way through it, right? Just because you can say this is important, how much does a CEO need to read and study and understand before they can actually go, okay, I know how to set up a program. I know how to change everyone's mind around this. No, it's how do I start from the top? How do I create the environment to do it? But then also, what are some ways that I can sort of gently infuse this into the system? And so, like, for example, the type of assessments that we do infused into HR, I typically use it more for sales, because sales is your voice box for your culture. So when you map the right salespeople, your sales improve, but you are communicating to the world more effectively what you bring to the table, what you are, right? And if the sales team gets out of line with the operations, it's where, they don't sell the right thing. They sell things that don't exist. And it leads all this stress down the road, where they're like, oh yeah, I sold this. And the engineer's like, it doesn't work. It doesn't happen like that. And they're like, great, it's due Thursday. And everybody's like, well, that's my day. Thanks. So what you can do is you can kind of infuse this into it in a way that's like, okay, how do we start finding people that are going to respond with us and move the way we need to, and tolerate the way we execute, so that they enjoy their job without a lot of stress. But at the same time, the benefit of diversity it keeps you in a status of openness, because I now have to learn something I'm not used to. There's a whole world, I was just, one of the things, one of my core tolerances is curiosity. I love learning about things. I'm just a student. I want to be, on my deathbed, reading a book, studying something I don't need to know because I'll not be able to translate it to any. But the point being is, I get fascinated with people and where they're from and why they're this way or that way, or where they came from. And, and I found out all this magical stuff about people and all these crazy histories about people from all over the world. And I realize that there's this opportunity to just change the way you see things and live the stories of life with people at work as you're building day-to-day relationships, learning how to stay open and say, okay, I don't have to have the answer to this right away. This may be a challenge. This may be something I'm just going to have to carry in suspension, because it's always going to be a mystery on how to solve it, because they do X and I do Y, and I'm pretty sure I'm not going to change Y, and I'm pretty sure X isn't going to change over here. So how do we live with that and live in that tension? And that's what makes life growthful. And I think that if you don't have an attitude of ethic of growth within the company and within themselves, they're just not, it's quick to move back to, well, that didn't work. And that's where it fails, because they're like, oh, we put a lot of energy and put a lot of money in it. And then some CFO looks at some numbers and they look at the wrong data and they make a decision. And they do this all the time to sales teams. They say, we're spending a lot of money in sales commissions. So they cut the top talent. And then they're like, why were our sales down? And then they're like, oh, we got to hire a VP of sales. So that person hires a whole bunch of people and the numbers go up. And then one day the CFO says, nope, cuts it off. And he keeps the business in this constant roller coaster instead of steady growth, because he thought this number was more valuable, trying to save money and some short-term gain. This is the same idea around diversity and growth, is that they don't know. They think that if they don't have an even steady slope into success, it's too hard. And then they get back to the things that are easy, and they're chasing that metabolic, that lack of metabolic stress. And that's kind of the cheap way out, honestly. It's the way I feel it. It's just like, no, well, you had an opportunity and you didn't give it enough work because you didn't give it enough work. And so I think I feel like the intention comes after openness, but there also has to be the path. And it's hard to see that path just by explaining it. It won't happen through a lecture. Let's just put it that way.
Very powerful work that you're doing, because even when you talk about those who are in career transition, those who are in a company for a long time and they're just used to a certain way of things, and then for them to not even realize that, hey, like, this is my reality, I actually hate my reality, right? And that's why, like, I'm probably not as effective as I otherwise could have been, right? Like, there's a lot of that I think is lost in when you're just kind of going with the flow, versus your approach of being curious, learning. And then it's like, help me understand. Like, a lot of that piece plays a key role. And it ties into one of my second last questions as we slowly wrap up our conversation is, when it comes to unleashing the potential of individuals and organizations, what's the first thing that comes to mind for you?
It really comes down to self-awareness. I think once you see what you are, I thought I was a banker. Then I could not get promoted past a certain level. And I realized when I saw the data that I terrified bosses, because all they want to do is change things. And I was in a 300-year-old industry. They don't want to change. They want to do their thing and drive their Mercedes home. Don't make my day stressful, right? And I'm over here like, let's change everything. Let's innovate. And they're like, you just stay there. We're not bringing you up into our management meetings. And I was like, oh. When I finally saw it, I went, yep. I am now aware that I had no business in that industry. I should have been in finance, in technology, where they were like, oh, let's break things. And I'm like, yeah, let's break things. Let's try new things. And they're like, yeah, let's do it. And then it disrupted an industry. And so that self-awareness empowers you to be able to say and start to see what's missing. So if you're in a bad job or the job is not fulfilling you, understanding what you're bringing to the table that's different, that's consistently causing problems, that's consistently causing you metabolic stress, starts to help you understand that, okay, is that a me problem? Right? Is that am I being prideful? Am I being this or that and the other? Or is it my boss's problem? Or is it a company problem? And so sometimes people go into creative crisis where they've learned the job, and what the fun part of learning a job is where you get all your dopamine, where you suck at something and you get better at it, you get dopamine the whole time. But as soon as you automate it, like it's on autopilot, you can be successful and miserable. It just goes every day gets less innovative. It's just less joy. And then you're like, why do I hate my job even though I'm killing it? And you're like, well, you haven't tried something new. And so what's happening is it's not the company's fault. It's actually you're just not growing, and it's making you feel with less joy every day. So find something. So if the job is doing all the things, keeping the kids in college, keeping everything in your life moving forward, and it's not something you want to give up, well, find something you suck at and start. Like you're in martial arts, right? So I should go do that. Make that part of my life. And I'm like, I'm terrible at it. Day one, and the 6-year-old kid is going to throw me to the ground, and that's cool. And I just have to suck it up. But every day I'll start to feel better because I'm trying something I'm getting better at. And then my job satisfaction goes up. And that's just how it works.
Happy for you that you found that environment that truly allows you to flourish and allows you to thrive in terms of like you're excited, like your passion is contagious through the screen. And my last question to you is, what is one thing you're working on that you're excited about?
The one thing I'm working on that I'm excited about is, while the first part of understanding how to map cultural tolerances was a good thing, the next step is actually building it into quantifiable predictive analytics. And so as trying to lean into the geeky side of myself, I want to build quantifiable quality of culture assessments, in that helping companies understand the impact of a strong cohesive culture, and that the value that can have on how they exit, who they merge with, what private equity that they buy into, because the relationship is two ways, even though all the money's going in one direction. It's a two-way street because you have to live with each other at the end of the day, and all of those types of things. So as businesses go forward, I want to be able to help them actually put more of that quantifiable, dollar value to the impact of a culture fit or a lack of thereof, and so that they become less surprised when they make mistakes. It's like, oh, I saw that could have happened. These are some things, or just miss them altogether. And that quantifying is the thing that I've been working hard with some data scientists and through some engineering, trying to figure out how to build that into a way that helps companies really track the financial impact of what's happening in their company as people move up and throughout the organization. And that way you can see we may have a problem with department A or B because things have changed culturally over there, and no one seems to be bothered by it. And I want HR managers to be able to see that. And so that's what I'm working towards.
Well, congratulations. It sounds like you're doing something that is going to be really big, impactful, and it's going to get your cogs rolling, right, as you do this. So, Steve, thank you so much for taking the time to share your story and your insights. And to those who didn't know this, you are an absolute giant. You're very brilliant. Your ability to translate complex things into a very simple manner, and your ability to connect is what is the biggest thing that has differentiated you as an individual. And you played a key role in my life as a person that I'm like, can you please be my mentor? Because it's like you have a lot of these skills that I'm like, I want to be like that when I grow up one day, right? So thank you again for being you and for bringing everything that you have to the table today. And to everyone else, thank you so much for your time and attention. It means a lot to me, and I can't wait to stay in touch with you on my next episode. Till then, stay safe.